Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Allison Heidsieck. I'm one of the co-founders and president of the Appalachian Science Communicators, AppSciComm. For anyone who may be new or hasn't attended a talk in a while, we are a regional group of the National Association of Science Writers, founded when some of us noticed that there were strong science writing groups on the coasts and in the bigger cities, but nothing through the large swath of Appalachia. So we created AppSciComm to create camaraderie and support for the people communicating about science in this beautiful part of our country. Earlier this year, we finally achieved our goal of attaining nonprofit status. And through our fiscal sponsor, New Sun Rising, we're now able to accept tax-deductible donations, which is key as we hope to pursue grants in the future for bigger events, perhaps a professional development conference and scholarships. But our nonprofit status, and even just having our website, comes with costs. And those of us who keep AppSciComm going are all volunteers with the busy and not so well compensated lives of science communicators. So we've set a goal to raise $1,000 to cover these costs so we can keep going and pursue grants for bigger and better initiatives. If you believe in the importance of having science communicators living in our communities to cover the often taxpayer-funded scientific discoveries happening in our institutions and impacting our lives, please donate. It's super easy. Just go to our website, appscicomm.org, and you'll see a giant green donation button at the top. Just click it and you'll be brought to a donation page hosted by our fiscal sponsor, New Sun Rising. It's as easy to donate there as it is through a GoFundMe or Facebook fundraising. And as a special bonus, if you donate, we'll send you one of our high quality water bottle stickers. Now, I'm excited to introduce AppSciComm member Kristina Marusic. Kristina is an author and award-winning Appalachia-based journalist who covers environmental health and justice for Environmental Health News. She holds an MFA in nonfiction writing from the University of San Francisco, and her personal essays and reporting on topics ranging from the environment, LGBTQ plus equality, and politics to feminism, food, and travel have been published by outlets including CNN, Slate, Vice, Women's Health, The Washington Post, MTV News, The Advocate, and Bustle, among others. She lives in Pittsburgh with her partner of 10 years, Michael, and the cutest dog in the world, Mochi. Visit her online at www.kristinamarusic.com to get a discount code to order her book, which is shipping now. And that is why we're here today, is to discuss her book, A New War on Cancer. Thank you so much for joining us, Kristina. Today, the way we're going to do this talk, many of us attended your book signing and book launch last week. And so today what we want to learn about, since many of us are writers ourselves, is how you went about writing, researching, publishing a book. But first, if you could, just for our audience, give a summary of your book.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Allison, for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here and for existing. I was so excited to learn about this group, and I'm a member just as of recently. I was so excited to join because I think it's really important and helps build community and share resources. And yeah, I'm just thrilled that the group exists and that I get to talk to you all. So thank you. The book is A New War on Cancer, The Unlikely Heroes Revolutionizing Prevention. Oh, I always forget it's mirrored, so it probably looks weird on the screen. But it just published on Thursday last week, so a week ago today. So it's very hot off the presses. And the book is essentially the story of this growing national movement to prevent cancer by reducing cancer-causing chemicals in our everyday lives. And I structured it through profiles of people who are leading the work. So one chapter is about an NGO leader, one chapter is about a researcher, one chapter is about a grassroots activist. And then woven throughout the chapters is the story of a young woman. I called her a young woman. We're actually the same age, and I'm not that young anymore. But I think of her as being a young woman to get a cancer diagnosis, who was diagnosed with breast cancer at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it follows her through her journey, getting diagnosed, getting treated. And she lives in Pittsburgh. She lives in the Troy Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh and grew up in Oil City, which is the birthplace of the American oil industry. So her story also branches out into talking about the connection between the fossil fuel industry and carcinogens in our air, water, food, and personal care products. Yeah, that's a quick summary, but I assume we'll get to talk about a little bit more in the book. Yeah, what else would you like to talk about?
I think that's a wonderful summary. And I read the book myself. I think it's fantastic. I encourage everybody else to take a look at it. It's just beautifully written and it's really engaging. I love how you have the narrative flow throughout while also giving us scientific information. So yeah, if you could just kind of to start with, tell the story of what inspired you to actually write a book about this. It's a big leap from learning about something to saying, you know what, I'm gonna write several hundred pages on this.
So my younger sister, Abby, was diagnosed with thyroid cancer when she was 25 years old, which is very young for a cancer diagnosis. And thyroid cancer tends to run in families, but no one else in our family had ever had thyroid cancer, and no one has since then. And so we were left wondering, if something she was exposed to might have played a role. Thyroid cancer is one of those that is pretty strongly linked to environmental exposures. And then my sister is doing great. She's in remission. She has 2 super cute kiddos who I get to hang out with regularly. She's been in remission for 10 years after having her thyroid removed. But so that happened in 2011. And then in 2019, once I started working for Environmental Health News and doing investigative reporting focused on the environment and health, I was still thinking about that question and wondering, if she had environmental exposures or if living in Pittsburgh with its air pollution problems might have played a role in her cancer. And I wrote a series of stories called Prescription for Prevention. That was a 5-part series on the role of air pollution in some of our disproportionately high cancer rates in Western Pennsylvania. So Western Pennsylvania has higher than the national average rates of a handful of cancers that have really strong ties to environmental pollutants, and in particular air pollution. And those of you outside of Pittsburgh might not know that Pittsburgh still regularly sees some of the dirtiest air in the country, and that we have just ongoing problems with air pollution. And Allegheny County, which encompasses Pittsburgh, is in the top 1% of US counties for cancer risk, specifically from air pollution. So while I was writing that series, I learned some things that were totally shocking to me and that I thought warranted a deeper investigation. One of those was that a group of cancers that are strongly linked to environmental exposures rates have just been skyrocketing since we started tracking cancer incidents in the 1970s. And that includes childhood and young adult cancers. And I spoke with this really brilliant epidemiologist, and those of you who attended my book talk last week would have already heard this, but I spoke with this epidemiologist and pediatrician named Dr. Phil Landrigan, who wound up writing the foreword to my book, and he said something that was this total light bulb moment for me. He said that change is too fast to be the result of genetic changes. Those happen over centuries and not decades. And also that the basic diagnostic tools for the most common childhood cancers, which the most common childhood cancer is leukemia, is the same today as it was in the 70s. So it's also not just a matter of we're diagnosing more of something that's always been there. So he said this is a real rapid increase in childhood cancer that we're seeing. And the only other option is something in the environment. He also said, the environment includes anything outside of our body and our DNA. So that also includes lifestyle factors like smoking and diet and exercise. And that might be relevant when we're looking at some of those adult cancers that we've seen increase that are linked to environmental exposures. But kids generally aren't smoking and drinking, and their parents might do those things, but over time, the percentage of parents who smoke and drink during pregnancy has steadily gone down, while childhood cancers are continuing to climb. And then from a more practical standpoint, that series I did on cancer and air pollution in Western Pennsylvania won a couple of awards, and I got a really lovely note from an editor at a book publisher called Island Press that specializes in books about the environment, saying, hey, I saw you won these awards, congratulations. I really appreciated that series. Do you think you'd ever be interested in expanding this topic into a book? And I said, yes, I'm really interested in doing that. That email happened in 2019, in like the fall of 2019. And so 4 years later, the book is real and it exists. We also had a really nice, this is like such a pre-pandemic story, but when that editor reached out, we had some back and forth, and then we were trying to schedule a call. And the following week, it turned out we were both going to be in Colorado for the Society of Environmental Journalists convention. It was in Fort Collins that year. And so she said, oh, let's just meet at the conference since we'll both be there. And we scheduled a meeting. And then we had our meeting. I think we scheduled half hour or an hour. But then it turned out we were both going to the same conference dinner afterwards, and then it turned out we were both at the same hotel, so we ended up taking an Uber back from dinner. So we ended up having this like 4.5 hour conversation about the book, and talking about ideas. And we also really clicked. We just liked each other, and I could tell that she would be nice to work with. I got more of a taste of that certainly once she was actually editing my work. But that was the start, and then we spent probably a year kind of emailing back and forth. I put together a proposal. She gave me feedback on the proposal. It was really an unconventional process because I wasn't working with an agent. So I just worked directly.
Yeah, I was curious about that. Okay, so right.
Yeah, so that's a little unusual. And I did make sure, so we spent a long time going back and forth about the proposal. She took it to the marketing team at Island Press. This is a little unusual too, and I think was to my benefit in this specific situation, because the marketing team was able to say, like, that's kind of like this other book that's already out there, so we don't think we'd be able to sell that. Basically, I had feedback before I started writing the book on like what they thought was marketable, what they thought they could sell. And certainly, I knew what I wanted the heart of the book to be, but I also wanted to write a book that they thought they could sell. So that feedback, having that feedback and communication was really important. And then when it came to when they offered me a contract, I think I signed my contract in 2020. And then I spent about, I think it was 18 months. I had 18 months from signing the contract to the manuscript is due. They initially suggested 12, and I was like, I'm going to just upfront go ahead and ask for a few extra months. And then they were very impressed when I delivered it exactly on deadline. So I would recommend that to anyone. Give yourself more time than you think you might need, and then everyone's thrilled when you deliver on deadline.
Love that.
Yeah. So. Oh yeah, I was gonna say, I can say more about not working with an agent if that's of interest, or
it's all of interest. I mean, I guess where I want to go this is really interesting. So I guess where I want to go first is, all right, so you had the discussion, you made the proposal, the marketing team gave some feedback, you kind of settled in on, okay, this is the proposal. So that's how it worked first, is you all settled in and everybody got on the same page about what this book will be about.
Yeah, and that had a very clear outline too, in terms of like the table of contents. So by the time I signed the book deal, it was like the structure of the book was pretty thoroughly laid out, which was helpful because, writing a book length thing is very different than writing an article.
So you'd already talked with Barry and you had an idea of the scientists lined up that you were going to do. Was it that detailed of a proposal and outline?
So Barry actually was a late comer to the book. So in the initial proposal, and Barry is the woman I mentioned who I chronicle her journey through getting diagnosed and treated for breast cancer in the book. So I had selected all of the scientists. There ended up being some shuffling of like, oh, it turns out that person's not the right fit, but I had like organized them kind of by theme thematically. Like there's going to be a chapter that's focused on food and drinking water, a chapter that's focused on cosmetics and personal care products, a chapter that's about a grassroots activist, you know, so I had that, like, they were generally structured, if not down to the specific people I was going to talk to. And I have a colleague here in Pittsburgh who also used to cover the environment, Oliver Morrison, who used to be at Public Source and is now at WESA. And he mentioned that he had a friend who had been diagnosed with breast cancer and had her suspicions that it was related to growing up in Oil City or, you know, a whole range of environmental exposures. And he suggested I speak with her. And initially I was like, I don't need to speak with her. It's going to be very, like, I'm talking to scientists. It's, you know, I'm all set, but thank you. And then as I was working on the book, I was like, actually, it's really critical to include the voice of someone who has cancer or has had cancer in this book. And I wanted a portrayal of what we're trying to prevent. And, you know, the whole reason, I'll say that there's a lot of science in this book and there are like a lot of citations and I looked through a ton of scientific studies, but it's really story driven. And part of the reason I decided to share more about these people I profiled than just their work. So I'm telling stories about their childhood and their parents' childhoods. And, you know, like sometimes if someone came from a family of immigrants, I'm sharing like way back stories. And part of the reason for that is that when we talk about treating cancer, it's really easy to advocate on someone's behalf and get people to feel empathy and get people to want to help, right? You can put a little girl's picture on a t-shirt and ask for help in her battle against cancer, and who does not want to pitch in for that? And when we talk about cancer prevention, it's really abstract. It's always like big data and long-term trends and statistics. And so I wanted this book to be full of humans. I wanted this book to really be include details about why people are so passionate about this and why they have devoted their life's work to this issue. And as soon as like that became clear to me, I was like, oh, I can't not have the story, you know, I can't not have a story of someone who is dealing with cancer in this book. So I spoke with the editor and I told her all of that. And she was like, I think you're right. I think you should talk to Barry. And so I started having meetings with her. And so I was probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 months into working on the book when I decided to include her and started having regular meetings with her.
Okay. I loved it. I thought it was really artfully done, the way you wove her throughout the whole story, like really wove her throughout the whole story. It was cool.
Thank you.
Kept coming back to her. I like that. Okay, so I kind of want to, and everybody else, just raise your hand at any time and I'll call on you to ask questions. But I guess where I want to start is, all right, you've got your proposal, it's accepted, you've got your plan laid out, you've got your deadline. What now? How do you actually start pulling together all the notes? Because this is way different than an article that you're turning around fairly quickly and you have like this discrete amount of space. This is whatever length it's going to end up being. How do you start? Yeah,
so I tried to be really systematic about it. I was really scared of, I was just like, this is not a thing I can procrastinate on. Like, I'm not going to be able to very quickly write a whole book before the deadline, right? I have to do this. I have to take the whole time to be working on this. And so the first thing I did was try to target the people I thought I wanted to profile. And I had, I kept lists going of who makes sense for this chapter, who makes sense for this chapter. And then I had preliminary calls with folks where I told them, what I thought the book was going to look like, why I was interested in profiling them, having them participate, and what I would need from them, like what kind of time commitment it would be from them to do this. And it was kind of arbitrary, but when I set out my plan, I thought, I bet I can, if I have 3-hour-long interviews with each person, and one interview is focused on their personal life, just getting to know them, hearing about their family and their childhood and their background, really with an eye to what are some stories about you that are relevant to why you do this work and why this issue is so important to you. And then one meeting that's just about the work, right? So I want to know, I'm reading their research, or I'm looking at the projects they've run for the people who are running NGOs, or I'm doing as much research as I can to then have an hour to ask them all the questions I would ask as a journalist, about this body of work. And then the third conversation, what did I call it? It's been just long enough now that I'm starting to lose it. The third conversation was, I don't recall exactly. It was another, I had it organized as like another separate, so that way I could let them be thinking about it.
I was gonna say, that's nice for your source to
Yeah,
like
I
come
tried
in
to
with.
make it, I found for sure, and I learned as I went, that to the extent that I could send them questions in advance, like the interview went better. I wasn't trying to have like a gotcha moment with any of these people I was putting in my book. So I wanted them to have thought about what are some stories from my past that are relevant to why I do this work, because that's hard to answer on the fly, right? So I definitely found that to the extent that I could share some of my questions and some of what I hope to get out of the conversation in advance, it would help. And then there was this additional challenge of, I was doing this in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that too. I mean, the idea for it and all the formation happened before, and then now suddenly you can't travel and sit down at a dinner table with these people. And
yeah, so if it wasn't the pandemic, that's what I would have done. I kind of told everyone that, like, look, I'd love to fly to Boston and sit down with you and talk about all this, but since we can't do that, here's my idea. I want to do 3 separate Zoom interviews. I also tried to, I told people I need to write scenes. I need to be able to write scenes, and I would normally get that by coming to your house or meeting you at your office or whatever. And so here's my idea for how we can do that remotely. And so, and I'm pretty straightforward about that in the book. Like, I had a Zoom dinner with one of the source who I
it almost made it better, I thought, because we got to see how you made this work, how you all made this work to still have a conversation. But
yeah, so like
ahead.
they got, this is the researcher who's focused on carcinogens in food and water. And so she put a laptop on her dining room table, and they got burritos from their favorite taqueria in Boston, and I got burritos from my favorite place in Pittsburgh. And I had dinner with her husband and her kids while we talked, right? And then I was able to kind of create a little scene around that. And it was so funny. They were like spinning the laptop around so I could talk to different people. And like one of the kids gave me a tour of their dining room. And it was, as I made it work, it certainly would have been more enjoyable to go to their house, I think, but some of that was a little bit fun. And then in the chapter about cosmetics and personal care products, I profile a researcher who's doing really cool, fascinating research on racial disparities and carcinogens in cosmetics and personal care products. And she, so the scene I ended up doing with her, she has a 5-year-old daughter who she said is like really interested in makeup. And so this was something we planned in advance. I said, could we be on Zoom and you like talk to her about makeup and look through your makeup kit with her? And that ended up being one of my favorite like scenes in the book, is where she's like jumping on the bed. She's so excited. Her mom tells her she can only try on one thing, and she convinces her to just do like a whole face of makeup because she's a very persuasive 5-year-old. And then that's like a segue into talking about, carcinogens and cosmetics, and like why we shouldn't, 5-year-olds are into makeup. And like, how do we feel about the fact that in this country, if you're not super knowledgeable about this, there's a good chance that there are cancer causing chemicals in the makeup you pick up at the store. So Yeah, COVID definitely presented some challenges, but I think it also, in other ways, it made it easier to schedule those things. Like, I didn't have to get like a whole weekend of someone's time. And for me, I didn't have the travel. It was all just Zoom. And then with Barry, since she was in Pittsburgh, we did meet in person. We met outside when we could.
I love the tours around her murals and stuff too, how you made that work out.
Yeah. I went to Oil City with her, and she gave me a tour of the town where she grew up, and she's an artist, and she gave me a tour of these murals she had painted around town, a lot of which had to do with the Oil City being the birthplace of the American oil industry. So there's like oil derricks in all of her murals. So when I could do stuff in person when that was accessible, I did. And also some of those meetings with Barry were like a little later in the, like after I'd been vaccinated, and she had been vaccinated. And I did, the final chapter in the book focuses on a grassroots activist in Clairton, Pennsylvania, which is about 20 minutes from Pittsburgh. And I met with her in person too. We met in her home, but we both wore masks the whole time. I sat in her house for like a whole afternoon, and we sat on opposite ends of the living room and wore masks. And so it definitely,
amazing. Yeah, even just thinking back those few years, yep, that's what we all did.
yeah. So there were some unique challenges for sure.
And everybody else, please, anytime, raise your hand. You can ask a question, or you can put it in the chat if you would like. So, all right. So you interview these folks. I guess one other little thing to get into, you have a job. You are a staff writer. So this is another thing you're fitting into your schedule, or how did you get yourself psyched up to keep going, and get this written?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am very, very lucky to work at a place that was excited that I was writing this book. The book came directly out of my reporting for Environmental Health News, and this is exactly the kind of stuff I cover for Environmental Health News. So they were excited. They were like, this is good for us. It's good for you. We don't want you to get burnt out. And they very generously suggested at some point that I start taking a day a week where I just only worked on the book and like didn't schedule work stuff and didn't go to meetings. So for most of a year, Mondays were book days for me, and I just only worked on the book. And I'm so grateful. I know that most journalists who have full-time jobs and write books do not get that. So I'm like very aware that it was a luxury, and I don't take that for granted. I also, I worked on weekends. I worked a lot of days. I would try to start early. I recognized that it was harder to like not do any book work for a week and then get back into it than if I felt like I was chipping away at it every day. So once I also didn't want to wait until I had all of my interviews to start like processing them into and incorporating the research and writing, because I've learned that lesson with doing big investigative reporting that it doesn't go well if I just try to wait until all my interviews are done to start writing the piece. So I as those interviews wrapped up, I would think about the research I had done and the research I wanted to talk about in the chapter. I would do what I do for an interview as a journalist, which is to go through the transcripts of my interviews and highlight them and mark them up just in Google Docs. But I find it really helpful to like highlight things in different colors. And then I do comments in the sidebar that's like, this is a great quote about this. This connects to this other thing they said earlier. This makes me think of this. It helps me just organize my thoughts in the actual document of the transcript. And then once that was done, I started writing sections. I wasn't sure how they would fit together or exactly where I would use them yet, but I knew it would be helpful to just have, like, I was like, okay, I know I want a section in the chapter about food and water, about pesticides. So I'm going to go through my interview and go through my research and write various everything I know and think the book needs to say about pesticides, and then I can like fit it together later. And that was how I was able to do it in a kind of piecemeal fashion. So And to do that, I just had a running Google Doc where I'd like label the sections. I'd just be like pesticides, PFAS in drinking water, you know, and then I'd like write the stuff I had. I certainly ended up overwriting doing that. There was stuff I didn't use, stuff that didn't make it in. There was, you know, stuff I ended up not realizing I would need and having to write later. But for me, that process worked and smoothed things out a little and let me feel like I was chipping away, right? So even if I could only do, if I was going to do like an hour or two on Saturday morning, I'd be able to be like, I have an interview where we talk about this, and then I have these 10 studies, so I can write a section on this. And then I was able to just kind of go through checking off the things I needed.
That makes a lot of sense. I see a hand. Anna, go ahead.
Yes. Hi. So you talked about how, you know, your journalism background kind of informed how you went about writing a book, but I was wondering if there was sort of like the reverse with, you know, having the book experience, having the book writing experience. Did it, you know, change in any way how you approach your sort of day job and, you know, the daily journalism stories that you're working on, or, you know, it's just like completely different things, so you sort of compartmentalize them in that way?
No, it actually was really beneficial to my day job because I was doing this like really deep research on stuff I cover all the time anyway. So I was really pleased. I felt better. I felt less guilty about getting that day a week to work on my book when I'd be working on a story for work and I'd be like, oh, I was just like researching this for my book, and I'd go into my book notes and go look for a quote that someone said and use it in my day job. So there was a ton of back and forth and crossover where stuff I was learning while I was reporting was making it into the book, where I'd be like, oh, this just happened and that's relevant to the thing I'm working on in the book, so I'm going to mention it. So very regularly while I was writing the book, I would be like working on a work story and pull up my book document and like put something I was thinking about in there, and vice versa, where I'd be working on the book and then I'd be like, oh, I should do a story on this for work. And even now, like the other day, I was working on a story for work and I was like, what was that statistic that I put in my book? And I just pulled up like the PDF of my book and did a control find and found it and was able to pull it out and work it into my reporting. So I think it would have been really a lot more difficult if I was like writing fiction, or if this was like my memoir or something totally unrelated. I think it would have been hard to have the brain space for all of it, but it was really nice that there was so much alignment.
Yeah, that works out well. Thank you.
That is awesome. I would wonder about that too, if I would get too muddled in with everything, or if it would actually help. But it sounds like environmental health news should be very, very happy that you are doing that.
Yeah.
Asher, I see you have a question too. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the sort of editing process, and like, did you turn, you know, you mentioned you had 18 months to write the book. Did you sort of turn in chapters along the way, or was it the whole thing? That must have been kind of a stressful thing to sort of hand in. And then, yeah, just like how long did the editing process and what did that look like?
Yeah, so we had regular check-ins where I was asked to deliver like portions of the book so that, you know, so it was a little less terrifying for me to have to do the whole manuscript, and also so that I really wanted to do that too, so that early on I could get a sense of if I'm doing something that you really don't like, or, you know, if you're going to end up like, if this is going to be really burdensome to edit, I want to know at chapter 1 rather than after I've done all this work. So I turned in, I think it was like at 3 months and 6 months and 9 months, I'd send her, you know, what I had. She would send back edits, and then we would talk about it. So I, you know, if she was doing something I didn't like, I had an opportunity to be like, to advocate, you know, if she wanted to cut something that I thought wanted to be kept, I could like advocate for that, and she could explain her rationale. And it was also just encouraging, because she was like, she would send me really nice notes back and she'd be like, this is awesome. Like, I think you're on track. I have these edits, but there's nothing, you know, no big flags to worry about, which was reassuring. gave me the strength to continue writing. And then when I turned in the full manuscript, they sent like a really elaborate checklist of everything that needed to be turned in at once. And I actually didn't realize until I was looking at it that day that it included acknowledgements. And so I very quickly like threw together my acknowledgements, realizing that I'd have some time to edit them. So, but that was a very funny, I probably spent 5 minutes on my initial acknowledgements and handed it in. And then I was like, I should make a more thorough catalog, or I'm gonna not thank people who are owed thanks for this. So then when I did turn it in, like the full manuscript, it took about, okay, here's where this is gonna derail the whole conversation. So remind me to come back to how long editing took. I was very insistent that the book be fact checked. And you may not know that no publisher in the United States fact checks nonfiction books. That if that happens, it's up to the author, and the author has to initiate it and pay for it. So really the only people who do it generally are journalists who are like very passionate about getting their work right. There's a really great Medium post about this I could send a link to that I read before I signed my book deal, because I wanted to negotiate for fact checking, and they were basically like, we just don't do it. And again, thanking and a big shout out to Environmental Health News. Our parent organization is Environmental Health Sciences, which is a group of scientists. So they're awesome to work with. They actually paid for fact checking for my book, because I was like, look, fact checking is expensive, but it's really important. It was probably going to be more than my advance. So I was like, I really want it fact checked. The publisher couldn't do it. I was really fortunate that my employer was like, yeah, that's important. We will help you fund fact checking. And so
that is truly frightening. No, thank you for sharing that. I thought that was, I know that some books are not fact checked and get called out for, like, you know, people realize how bad they are, but I hadn't realized it wasn't relatively
like
standard
not
practice.
like none of the top 5, like Penguin Random House, they're not.
Doesn't the publisher want to head off? Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm going to derail the conversation too if I go down.
You would think so. I know, it's very upsetting. It's very upsetting to learn about. So I had, from the very beginning of like negotiating my contract and like through the whole process, had been like, we need to build time into the editing process for fact checking. So I can't remember if we did that before. I think how we did it is I handed it in. We did one big round of edits over the course of like, so I handed in my book in February of last year. Is that true? Oh my gosh, sorry. Pandemic time still continues to be so weird. Yeah, not this past February of last year. And then we spent like 3 months going back and forth with edits, but we didn't want to do final edits until after fact checking. So we did like top level editing, and then I worked with 3 fact checkers, and I had each of them fact check 2-ish chapters. I think one person had an extra one at the same time, because otherwise it was going to take forever if one person fact checked the whole book. And I tried to be a little bit prescriptive about how like the system they use, so it didn't make me insane. So they were all using a pretty similar system, and I picked science. These are generally, all 3 of them are science journalists who, like, I think 2 of the 3 of them went through NYU's science SHRP program, and so they're like health environment reporters. And they all had fact-checking experience. One of them I knew because I had worked with on fact-checking for work. She fact-checked a huge investigation I did on fracking, and she was awesome. She was also she like had a full-time job and probably didn't have time to do this. She did a great job. But the other 2 were full-time freelancers, and this made sense. They had more capacity. Okay, so then that took, I want to say, another 3 months fact checking. And then after I made a bunch of revisions based on the fact checking and felt really solid about everything, we did another round of edits, me and the editor. And that was probably a month. And then we did copy edits with their copy editor, which was, they try to move that pretty quickly. That might have been a couple of weeks with the copy editor. And there was one thing that drove me crazy with the copy editor that I was not expecting. They use Chicago manual of style.
Yeah, okay, I was gonna say.
Apparently it's pretty common for books, but like I'm AP.
AP.
I'm a journalist. And
Yeah.
so there were a couple things that were weird to me, but the one that I like really put my foot down on was when she initially started sending me copy edited chapters, she had changed all of my contractions to spell out like cannot, is not, and it made the book feel like very formal and stilted, and it didn't sound like my voice at all anymore. And I was like, this is a crazy choice. I was like, I don't know if this is the Chicago thing, but this does not sound like me. It's not conversational. It's not how I want the book to sound. I involved my editor. My editor was like not involved in copy editing. It's a separate person. But when I flagged that, she was very quick to be like, I support Kristina. This is true. Please.
I mean, there's a narrative style throughout. You lose that.
Right.
You distance yourself
completely
from, yeah.
I try to have it feel kind of conversational. I'm trying to talk about these complex scientific topics in very plain language. So they were very gracious about that. And I won that argument, thankfully, and they put them all back in. That was the only like big fight we had in copy editing. And then, yeah, does that answer your question? Okay, good. So it was a long and arduous process, the editing, but like phased out in such a way where, you know, it felt doable. The fact checking part was, I'm sure anyone here who's ever had a story fact checked would know, the most kind of exhausting part of it, because I wanted them to be nitpicky, and but then when you're getting these comments that are like, this says it's 27 miles south of Pittsburgh, but it looks like it's actually 25 and a half, so you should round that to 26. I'm just like, yes, okay, great. Like, please let us move on. Yeah, it was intense.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Fact check is so important, so believe it. But yeah, when it happens and someone questions it and you're like, I don't know, you look it up. Now I got to go back and check all this again.
Yeah, I really appreciated having fact checkers who were versed in science communication, because one of the big things, you know, I knew they'd catch that stuff, and I was like, great, I want it to be right. I don't want that to have to hear about it on Twitter that I got something stupid wrong. But the bigger thing that I was really excited they were able to do was like pull up a study, and if I said like, this study found this, make sure that I wasn't overstating that or oversimplifying, or, you know, they did a really good job of helping me use accurate language to summarize studies. So, and that ended up being these tiny little tweaks sometimes on things like instead of this study found, it'd be like, this study indicated that potentially, you know, like it was a lot of them being like, you might want to soften your language here, or let's point to this different study that had stronger findings. And that stuff was invaluable. I really appreciated that they helped me do that. I just wanted a second set of eyes for that kind of stuff.
I appreciate that. If anybody else has questions, go ahead and raise your hands or chime in. I guess where I'd like to go next is, since we kind of, I put a pin in it, is go back to the agent discussion. So, and this was your first book, correct? You had it.
First book, yeah.
Okay. So I don't know, and I just kind of have absorbed that you're supposed to get an agent. So when you had been initially talking with the editor and moving down this path, was there a point where you're like, whoa, I need to research this, make sure I'm doing what's best for me? Or were you just able to move along?
Yeah, so I felt like I trusted the editor I was chatting with. You know, I developed a relationship and I liked her. And so I asked her, is it unusual for you to work with an author without an agent? Like, how often do you have agents when you do this? And she said for them, it's about a 50-50 split. I spoke with, I got an MFA. And so I got a lot of kind of formal education about the benefit of an agent and working with an agent that I think was helpful to have too. I didn't feel like I was totally oblivious, and then I did a lot of Googling, like why is an agent helpful? You know, how do they benefit you? And a lot of what they do is, first of all, I think the main benefit of an agent is getting you a publisher, right? So normally you put together a proposal, you shop it around to agents. Some agent says, I think I can find you a publisher for this. And then they have the connections to then go shop it around to publishers and try to get you the best deal. And I had skipped that step, right? And so if I got an agent like that late in the game, even though they didn't help me find the publisher, they would still get a portion of my advance. And I think they also get like a percentage of your royalties normally. And so that was one kind of like, do I need an agent at this point if I have a publisher? I did, you know, the other big thing they do is help you negotiate your contract. So they negotiate for a bigger advance, they negotiate for better royalties, they can help you negotiate about like an audio book and foreign publishing rights and film and all the stuff that's in a contract that if you're a first-time author, like most of us who aren't lawyers, just maybe don't have experience in. And with that stuff, I was like, well, I certainly don't want to just wing it. But I have my sister, the same one who had thyroid cancer, is an attorney, and she specializes in contracts. And so
that is very convenient.
Very lucky. Yeah. So when they sent a contract, I asked her to look at it. She pulled a bunch of other sample book contracts. She made suggestions for, you know, where she thought I could negotiate. And I did a pretty extensive I negotiated for a higher advance and got it. I negotiated on the percentage for royalties and I got that. One of the other funny things that she recommended that I did and that they were like, sure, was, I think they said like, we'll send you 5 copies of the book. And my sister was like, we have a huge family, you should ask for 10. So I asked for 10 copies of the book and they were like, sure. So I got 10 free copies. You also get a discount as an author, so I could buy more, but like, right, like before my publication date, I think this happened actually in like March, maybe, I got a big box with my 10 books. And it was very exciting. I cried.
Tell us about that. Yeah, that had to have been just amazing to really see.
Yeah, it was, you know, it had been like so long and I'd been working so hard and I didn't know exactly that they were coming. Like my editor had said like books might ship soon. And then I had a big box from Island Press. And when I opened it and it was my book, I just like, my husband took a really cute picture of me just like crying, holding up the book. Yeah, it was a really exciting moment. It certainly felt like I've always wanted to write a book. So it definitely was thrilling to just have it be real and in the world and something I could hold.
That's really cool. Anybody have any questions? Because I'm going to ask another one. Oh, there we go. Anna, go ahead.
So you mentioned that, you know, you always wanted to write a book. I guess like what's next for you? Like, is there a second book? Are you doing a follow-up on this one? Or like, do you want to do something completely different? Or you're like, I'm done, no more books. Just curious, like how this experience informs.
So right now, promoting the book is kind of a full-time job, which has been exciting. And also I'm still also trying to work my full-time job. So right now I have no interest in starting a new book. I think like, I don't know, maybe in 2 years I could see myself coming around. So I do want to write another book eventually. I've had a few ideas about like follow-ups to this book that would be kind of related. Island Press, I made a joke about it to my editor at Island Press and she was like, I know you're joking, but for the record, I would love to work with you on another book, which was really nice to hear. Also, as part of my book contract, they asked for right of first refusal on my next book, which I granted, which just means if I'm going to write another book, I offer it to them first and then they can say it's not for us. Or if they make an offer and I'm like, that's not enough money, then I could shop it. I would have the ability to shop it around to other publishers. So I might take advantage of that, you know, in a couple of years. Right now, I'm like, thank God I'm not like actively working on the book at this moment. And I'm about to actually start working with a publicist, which I'm excited about, to try and expand the reach of the book a little further. And that, it's pretty clear from the proposals I'm getting, is also going to continue to be a ton of work on my end. So I'm going to hunker down for a while and do my job and do what I have to help market this book, and then like maybe another book in a couple years.
Can you actually talk a little bit about like, what goes behind the scenes of like book marketing on the authors, like from the author's perspective?
Yeah, so another reason I was really excited to work with Island Press is most publishers, including the big five, don't do anything to market a book for a first-time author anymore. They do very, very little. So I've had friends if you're a super fan, if you're James Patterson, that's where their marketing budget is going. If you're a first-time author, like they might do a little bit. And this, I think, did not used to be true, but is true in 2023. Generally, they're like, maybe you should organize a book tour or try to get more Twitter followers. Like, good luck. We hope you sell a lot of books.
You should. Oh, come on.
I know, it's upsetting. Although I talked to someone recently who said he did a book and like, well, when was his book? I think he said his book was like 2016 and he worked with Macmillan and he thought they did a pretty good job. So maybe there are more exceptions than I know of, but most of the stories I've heard are like, they're not doing much. And Island Press, because they're a nonprofit printing press, they're pretty small, but that also means that they are grant funded and they have to demonstrate impact. And so they really are incentivized to have their books do well and reach people and create change in the world. So they have like a 7-person marketing team. And I asked about this before I signed my contract because I knew, other friends who've published books have flagged for me, like ask if they do anything for marketing. And they sent like a sample marketing packet. And I was really impressed by how much they do. And so they do a kind of multi-tiered approach. So they do the traditional, like they send out a bunch of galleys. This probably started like 4 months ago to journalists who cover these issues, looking for reviews, asking people to do articles. They sent a sample Q&A with me that would like make it really easy to publish a Q&A with the author kind of thing. They also, I should add that I contributed a lot of time and energy to these efforts because we have this like giant spreadsheet where one tab is me being like, here's every organization that's mentioned in the book. Here's every organization that should know about this. There's a tab that's like everyone you've ever met who might be interested in knowing that you have a book out. So you can send like a personal announcement email. There's a tab that's every journalist I know. And actually my like personalized outreach to journalists was really effective, as you would imagine. These are like colleagues, people I've worked with, people I know.
Yeah, they want you to do well.
Yeah, right. And then there's a tab for we also haven't done much on this yet. It's something I'm hoping a publicist is going to help with, but we poked around on research of like TikTokers and Instagram people who talk about these issues or who review books or who might be into this. And then they also did a lot of outreach to like local bookstores. Like Island Press helped me coordinate my book launch party with White Whale. I participated last weekend in the Greater Pittsburgh Book Festival, and that's because we reached out to Riverstone Books, which is another local bookstore here, and they were like, oh, we're having this festival, she could give an author talk and all the stores will sell the book. So they're awesome. And it's also I'm doing a lot of work and they're doing a lot of work and and then they offer webinars. So I've been setting up webinars with like environmental and health advocacy groups. And then, a handful with like groups of journalists like this. And so then that's involves, I have like a 100 slide deck about the book that I've created and have a pretty comfortable talk track about, so that I can do, I can hide slides or show slides and do anywhere from like a 15-minute talk about the book to an hour-long talk about the book. I was asked to talk to a group of physicians who are in like a postdoctoral med school program on environmental health for 90 minutes. As part of their grand rounds. And I was like, that is a long slide deck, but now I have it. Like I have the talk track. And actually one cool thing I did that was not facilitated by Island Press, but is like the coolest thing that's happened so far, so I'll brag about it, is that 3 weeks ago, I got an email from the EPA's Office of Children's Health Protection inviting me to come to Washington, DC and speak with, it wasn't public, so it was just EPA staffers, and talk with them about childhood cancer risk and environmental exposures. And it was just because they'd heard about the book. And so that's the thing.
Impact. That's
Yeah.
like, reaching
The
people
publisher
who
was
have
like,
the
"Well, you're
power.
The publisher was like, well, you're probably not going to sell a lot of books to them. And I was like, that's actually very much beside the point for this particular one. So I will be going to DC, but thank you. Yeah, so a long answer, but so it's like giving talks about the book, preparing. It took me a long time to like build the slide deck. Now that I have it, I can just kind of show up and give a talk. I did a lot of preparation for that EPA talk because it needed to be a little different. I tried to tailor it to the audience. I'm still doing a lot of like follow-up emails to the groups I haven't heard back from and to podcasts and all of that good stuff. So it's a lot of hustle, and if you have help I would definitely recommend working with a publicist if you can, you have capacity, and or trying to find a publisher that does marketing for the book that's going to help you, because it's a lot of work either way, but at least like I feel very supported. I don't feel, oh, we've made videos. Work is helping a lot with this. They're awesome. But we made a series of videos about the book where I interviewed people who are in the book. The first one just came out today on YouTube.
Oh, cool. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah. And with that, we are actually just about at time. I wanted to check, is there anything, journalist style, anything I haven't asked you about that you think would be important for folks who are curious about the book writing, publishing process to know? It's okay if there's not. Nothing's coming to mind? Are you there?
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Oh, you froze on my screen. Okay, we're good then. All right, then I am going to close this out by saying thank you so much for the time you took today to share your knowledge with us. Really appreciate it. And for anybody who hasn't yet read the book, New or on Cancer, you can get it very easily. I highly recommend it. It was fabulous reading.
Thank you so much. This has been lovely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yep. And we will get this recording posted in the next couple days or so and share it around with our members. And I will make sure to get you a link as well. I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us.
Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.